Here we are following a day of recording in Manchester at GCUC UK. We've been here live all day recording Flex That Works, and we have had some phenomenal conversations. So we thought it would be interesting to have a quick chat about what stood out to us, what we're definitely going to be thinking about coming away from the event today, and what we think operators are going to be interested to hear about and think about going forward. Any initial thoughts from the day, Graham?
There was so much covered, and to be honest, at the end of the day, and I'm trying to wrap it all up, trying to break it all out is quite difficult. But look, let's give it a go anyway. I think started at the top of the day with Colliers and Paddy and Phoebe. It's good. It's always good to get the hard facts of what's actually going on. Look, Manchester. I keep saying it. Manchester. You don't need to see stats and figures to see that Manchester is buzzing, and even with the other chats we had. It's the same thing happening in Bristol, Leeds, Newcastle. One thing we laughed about was this is all classed as regions, which has an entirely different meaning in Ireland. But regional cities are bursting at the seams as well, and especially when it comes to flex and co-working. So that was interesting.
And I think on the regional piece, what I've really taken from today is in the room. I suppose a year ago, we were starting to see this conversation maybe culminate between flex on one side and the real estate on one side, and the indie co-working and the maybe solo owner operator of one location on the other side. I think all of that was coming closer together today is what I saw. There are far more conversations about data, how to speak about the performance of a space, not being afraid to speak about what's really going on, being a bit more transparent, and also starting to put together a couple of numbers that actually make sense to both groups. So there's this new language, I suppose, we're bridging the gap a little bit, and people are starting to see the viewpoints of others at different sides of that spectrum of flex and co-working.
It's amazing actually, like when you go to things like this now, AI is the topic of the day, but it wasn't in this instance. It was all about data and distillation of data, and AI and how it will assist to inform the industry better. And what I thought was really great was the openness that is in the room, and the that shared knowledge piece that is in the room, because co-working and flex is in a place where it was agreed that people see the full size of the opportunity hasn't been recognised yet. There is new people coming into the market, new user types, new ICPs, and there's also talks of Me Too operator types and brands, which again is very notable comment to pick up on, which again comes back to something that we keep talking about, is how are you differentiating your brand? What do you do for your end users that the brand across the road aren't doing? And I think there's still a bit of a way to go for people to sit down and have that serious inward look at their business and their offerings.
And I think we do have the conversation about the industry maturing. It's reaching a broader audience little by little. Sometimes that means kind of the money in the real estate's coming into the conversation. That doesn't suit everybody. Some of those conversations, on the smaller spaces, just there's loads of range, let's say, in the conversation. But the one thing that was in common today, to your point, there's a serious level of maturity about AI and tech and systems. People are not in a flap about it. People are actually very grounded about, yes, I've come here and I've learned about systems, AI, data, but I still know what I need to do to go home and have a conversation with a real human.
You nailed it exactly. The one thing people kept coming back to was the topic of people and the topic of place. And I know community is something we say in co-working, and people instantly nearly roll their eyes, but I think people genuinely see people and what the spaces that the community managers are creating, the owner operators are creating, the reason to leave your house and the reason to go out there and connect. That was something that came through the whole time, and it was interesting. We talk about AI and data and all these kind of mad
possibilities,
workflows and possibilities and automations, but you can't AI a switched on community manager. You can't,
I'm going to give a moment to Johnny from Spacemate and the conversation that came up as well with Paddy from Collier's around one place where things are maturing to another level again is around the management agreements, the leasing models, the conversations that need to be had, people developing the skill set to go into those conversations and get the right frameworks in place from the beginning, have the right agreements in place to set them up for success in a way that respects everyone involved, that it's ticking all the boxes for everybody's respective interests. That's an interesting one, right?
Yeah, and that goes across all businesses, you know, working agreements, contracts and stuff like that. There are things that you need to get tight day one so that you can put them away and forget them. You know,
there's been such a level, I suppose, of maybe a lack of understanding as to what's a well-performing operator. You know, if an operator goes in for 24 months and says it didn't work, like what does that actually look like? Who pays the bill? All of that is growing up a little bit too, isn't it?
I think, you know, and, you know, coming back to the Me Too comment, what's happening now is you've proven operators in the market, and the more proven operators that are in the market, the harder it becomes to enter the market. So I'd say, you know, there will be a natural, people naturally find their place in the market, find their niche, I suppose, or their, you know, where they stand out and why they're different. But I don't think it's going to be as easy to, I don't want to say it's easy, but I don't think it's going to be as open a market to, I think the barriers to entry, that moat is now being created by the operators that are already in existence. You know? Yeah,
and I really enjoyed the chat with Gary, the guys from Foundry,
great, yeah.
Karina and Emma, from Clockwise and Runway East. We were chatting about, I suppose, in particular with Foundry, they've done the scaling piece, but they've still managed to retain success based on local knowledge.
Yeah.
And actually, they're front loading their time and attention at the beginning, where they're really putting the time in to understand the nuances of the space, the environment the location is in, the whole community there, and allowing the team to hyper-localise a lot of the marketing that they're doing. Whereas we've also spoken to Clockwise and a couple of multi-location operators where they've talked about branding and consistency across locations, but again, always coming back to the importance of that local nuance being allowed, a bit of freedom being given to their team. And I will add on to that as well, because this is a summary episode. We're not getting into everything. The episodes are yet to come. But that piece then about hiring correctly, so that you can trust that it's been executed well, and you don't need to be doing everything. You just need to be clear on what moves the needle for your business and your members, and then trust your team on the ground is executing well on that.
And the other thing is, like, the other thing that came through was there's the distinct types of data, the quantitative and the qualitative.
Yes.
And I think one thing that came through was the difficulty people are having in collecting and monitoring the qualitative stuff. And yeah, there's a science to that, and a structure to that, but just because you may not be able to do it with any level of great scientific ability doesn't mean you shouldn't collect it, at least for your own anecdotal analysis.
Without getting overwhelmed.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I suppose I enjoyed that idea, and I'd heard it before, but sometimes you hear things in a new way. That concept that Felicia was sharing around, you know, input data, output data, impact data, and how are we measuring it, you know. And if we get, and then Stacey as an operator was sharing that, you know, actually today really opened her eyes, because she would have said she was single site, didn't think she'd be in the conversation. I don't think she'd mind me saying, you know, around a lot of the volumes of data that they're describing in the multi-site operators and brands, but actually the conversation today helped her identify her own position in that conversation.
And I love that was a living, breathing example of how just because you might be a smaller operator doesn't mean you can't learn from the bigger operators. And
likewise,
the pieces she took away today are a prime example of that super professionalized, process-based data measurement type of approach permeating down into smaller operations. And you see that now across, you know, all businesses, small e-commerce businesses, cafes, you know, all these POS systems that are correct, you know, that's all coming to coworking. If it has, you know, if it's here already, but it's making its way to the smaller, more independent operators.
Yeah, and what struck me was if you're in a smaller location, or, you know, a maybe fewer spaces, and you're going to collect fewer elements of data, you're still picking the same ones that the bigger ones have. So you've that in common. So you're very relevant in the conversation. And you, like we spoke to bigger operators, you know, you touched on the regional cities idea. These bigger operators that are moving out into the regional cities kept coming back to the same essence of actually what the smallest, most rural hubs in Ireland treat as their kind of winning cards that we see. That is the people, it is the community, that's a whole, you know, I'm encompassing everything in the word community there. And it's the impact.
So I loved actually was one thing a lot of operators spoke about but didn't actually label it, and it was almost flogged to death there one stage was customer experience. They all spoke about customer experience, but nobody actually, I don't think anybody actually said the term customer experience.
Not today. No, not today.
It's just so embedded in their approach, you know, that they don't even need to label it.
That, and also what I did notice today was people referencing the role members can play when they're actively engaged in the space. So like talking about members actually pitching in to collecting the data, or volunteering anecdotes, giving testimonials, bringing other people to the space. That was the way I heard members referenced. And it felt more, I suppose, connected, more together. People felt, you know, I thought the operators all sounded like they really understood their locations, whether or not they're on site all the time.
And that's because, and again, I got the feeling that hiring local serves the local business better.
And hiring well, and I know somebody said it might sound brutal, but if something's not working, take a quick decision and look for somebody who will be a good fit, because you might only have resources to make one hire and it could be make or break. Like, there
was one thing as well, NPS came up as a topic, and they almost like they step back from that, you know, for the smaller hubs, roll their eyes at NPS. And I got thinking about that. Why there might be an apprehension or a disdain to use it in co-working. And if you think about the businesses that use it quite a bit, it's businesses that have customers. Nobody we spoke to today spoke about customers, they spoke about members. So putting a member through an NPS, you know, yes, it's a tool that's there right now, but I can understand why people say, well, look, we're family. What do you give me an NPS scorecard for? You know, I'm a member.
But interestingly, as well, the same person who I think you're talking about there, who was bringing it up in particular, because we talked into it a bit, was talking about changing out the questions, because NPS also had kind of standard questions regardless of industry, and they were like, nah, it's not that NPS, you know, it's kind of like, what's the saying, you know, it's not your grandma's NPS, you know. So
cool so how is that going to evolve? That's going to evolve to one that's obviously structured specifically to co-working space, and they'll probably give it a different name that isn't NPS. Yeah.
We also had a conversation about on the data side of it, but also just the ops, the actual cost of running spaces. So rather than being into like your own P&L and stuff, but just what a simple framework can look like if you're not already across the basics, to make that nice and approachable for people who might kind of have that overshadowing feeling that there's some things they should have in place that they don't. So that's going to be coming in an episode. And we also talked through what it is looking like now that people are willing to lift the veil a little bit as to what their own operations are looking like.
Again, because it's competitive space for sure, but I think people see now that not every client is going to be a fit for you, and just go after the ones that suit your space and not others. So in that instance, if we don't want them or need them in our space and they're not going to be a fit for our space, we all have bills to pay. Let's not. Why not? Why don't we just compare and contrast and see how we're doing if we're not actually, you know, competing for the same ICP?
Yeah. Our last conversation of the day was with the CEO of this entire location where the event took place today, which is Allied London is behind Camfield, and Department is actually the operator who's in here. It's been fantastic to see it brought to life. Graham actually walked around here. It was a construction site last year as part of the GCUC tours last year. So it's absolutely incredible. I bet for you, having seen it in that state, I drove past it on the road and I said to you, what's that? That looks cool. And then we clocked that we were touring it the following day. So really cool to see the way Tanya and the team have brought all the different locations to life. I know activating all the different elements of it is something that they're working hard on. So if you're in Manchester, certainly pop in.
But even with that, you know, it's a year in operation, but even chatting to Tanya to see how they've consistently pivoted and changed and adapted the use and function of the space. And again, like, look, fair play to the Juicy team again today. You know, the great event. Look, very,
amazing. Yeah, fantastic. We've only got to have such great conversations because the guys have curated such an incredible lineup of speakers, and the audience has been fantastic as well, everybody who attended. I'm looking forward to going and spending a bit more time with all of them now. Thanks a mil for a great day, Graham.
That was good fun. Hard work, but bit of crack.
Absolutely.